AITA for making my sister pay back my daughter. I, 42F, have a daughter, Brooke, 16F, who is a total bookworm. And when I say bookworm, I don't just mean she reads a lot. I mean books are her passion, her escape, her world. She started reading at 5 and never stopped. She's the kind of person who will stay up late, curled up with a book and a flashlight under her blanket, completely immersed in a fictional world. She saves every penny of her allowance to buy books, always hunting for the next special edition, signed copy, or collector's item. She has bookshelves lining her walls, filled with rare editions, limited prints, and some books she loves so much that she owns multiple versions of them. Every single book in her collection means something to her. So when she saved up for months to get a special edition of her favorite book series, she was ecstatic. The book finally arrived last week, and she was practically glowing with happiness. She unwrapped it so carefully, like it was the most fragile thing in the world, and placed it in the perfect spot on her shelf. I don't think I've ever seen her that excited over anything. Now, enter my sister, Lindsay, 36F, and her daughter, Mariah, 13F. Lindsay and I have never been super close, but we have a decent relationship. We see each other occasionally, mostly at family gatherings or when she needs a babysitter. Mariah, on the other hand, has always been a handful. She's spoiled, entitled, and has a habit of taking things that don't belong to her. Lindsay brushes it off as kids being kids. But to me, there's a difference between a child making a mistake and a child deliberately doing something wrong without facing consequences. On Saturday, Lindsay and Mariah came over for a visit. It had been a while since we'd seen each other, so I was hoping for a nice, drama-free afternoon. The moment they walked in, Mariah immediately tried to go upstairs to Brooke's room. I stopped her, telling her that Brooke wasn't home yet, but would be back in about 20 minutes. I suggested she stay downstairs with us and tell me about school instead. She looked annoyed but sat with us for a bit, answering my questions with one-word responses before suddenly saying she needed to use the bathroom. We have 2 bathrooms in our house, one upstairs and one downstairs. Unfortunately, the downstairs one was having plumbing issues, so I told her she could use the one upstairs. She nodded and went up. 15 minutes later, Brooke came home. She greeted everyone, smiled, and then headed upstairs to change. Not even 5 minutes later, a scream echoed through the house. I shot up from my seat, my heart immediately racing. I ran up the stairs, fearing the worst. But when I reached Brooke's room, I stopped in my tracks. My daughter stood in the middle of the room, tears streaming down her face, looking at what could only be described as a massacre of books. Pages were ripped from their bindings, shredded into tiny pieces. Covers were bent, torn, or completely destroyed. Some books were thrown carelessly across the floor like they were garbage. And at the center of the destruction, the special edition book she had just bought, completely ruined. The cover was ripped clean off, pages crumpled and torn, like someone had deliberately tried to destroy it. And standing near the wreckage was Mariah. Brooke was sobbing, too stunned to even say anything. She just kept looking at the mess, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I turned to Mariah, my hands shaking with rage. "What did you do?" I demanded. Mariah crossed her arms and shrugged. "They're just books. Just books." I think I almost blacked out for a second from sheer fury. I turned to my sister, who had followed me upstairs and was now standing in the doorway, looking completely unbothered. "Your daughter destroyed my child's books," I said, trying and failing to keep my voice calm. "She needs to apologize right now and clean up this mess." Lindsay rolled her eyes. "Come on, she's just a kid. She didn't know what she was doing." I actually laughed at that. "She's 13, Lindsay. She knew exactly what she was doing." Lindsay sighed, acting like I was making a big deal over nothing. "Look, if Brooke didn't want her books touched, she shouldn't have left them out." "They weren't out." I snapped. "They were on her shelves, in her room, where Mariah had no right to be." Brooke, still crying, finally managed to choke out, "Why would you do this?" Mariah rolled her eyes. "It's just paper. You can buy new ones. That's when I lost it." I turned back to Lindsay and said, "Your daughter is never coming back to this house, and you're going to pay Brooke back for every single book she destroyed." Lindsay scoffed. "You're being ridiculous. I'm not paying for some books. These aren't just some books. Some of these are limited edition. They're not even replaceable." "Well, that's not my problem," she said, shrugging. "Mariah didn't mean it. She's just a kid." "No," I said, shaking my head. "She's old enough to know better. And if you don't teach her consequences now, she's going to grow up thinking she can do whatever she wants and get away with it." Lindsay rolled her eyes and grabbed Mariah's arm. "Come on, let's go." Clearly, my sister cares more about stupid books than her own niece. Before leaving, Mariah turned to Brooke and smirked. They weren't even that good anyway. Brooke burst into fresh tears as they walked out. After they left, I sat down with Brooke and helped her clean up the mess. She was heartbroken. I've never seen her so devastated. It wasn't just about the books. It was about the fact that someone came into her personal space, disrespected something she loved, and got away with it. That night, I told my husband what happened. He was furious. He agreed that Lindsay needed to pay Brooke back, but we both knew she wouldn't. And we were right. I reached out to Lindsay again, demanding that she reimburse Brooke. She refused. She called me a greedy bitch and said I was overreacting over something that wasn't a big deal. To make things worse, my extended family started getting involved. Apparently, Lindsay ran to our parents and painted me as the villain, saying I was being too hard on Mariah. Now I have my mom, my dad, and a handful of relatives telling me that I need to be the bigger person and let it go because Mariah is just a kid, but I refuse. Actions have consequences. Mariah walked into my daughter's room and deliberately destroyed something she loved. And if Lindsay won't teach her accountability, then I will. So, Reddit. AITA for demanding that my sister pay for the books her daughter destroyed?